Emmanuel, sorry, if you'd like to take it away.
Thank you so much, Habib, and I want to thank you all for attending this press conference. And I'm sure in about a year from now, we're going to be physically meeting to just update you on the consequences of this unique crisis in the history of the EU, and unfortunately also in the history of the creative sectors of Europe. Just as an introduction, I'd like to underline the importance of this JSAC commission, but also many other organizations commissioned study that we commissioned to EY. As a reminder, in 2015, JSAC used its leverage as encompassing the broad family of authors all over Europe to commission a first ever made study about the weight of the creative industries and their size as a contributor to economic growth, jobs, and also a leverage for the rest of the EU economy. And so when this crisis started, we decided to do a focus study on the impact for 2020 of the COVID crisis. And in a few moments, Marc Lermite will give you details about the studies that you may already all have received. I'd also like to thank all our partners, more than 20 organizations that have, together with JSAC, commissioned this study, and also a special thank to Commissioner Maria Gabriel, whom we engaged with during the summer and who insisted on the importance of having numbers and figures for the all commissioners that we will meet during this afternoon. Basically, what we will deliver with a delegation of creators, of very engaged representatives from the creative industries of Europe are threefold. First, finance. In the Recovery and Resilience Facility, around 670 billion euros that has been identified by the EU, it is absolutely crucial that a portion of that, we say approximately 2%, may be dedicated to supporting the creative and cultural industries. And here we clearly see this as a leverage, even though we know that the EU has very limited funding for the creative industries. This is a moment in time where this leverage effect on what the member states will do to support their creative industries will be instrumental. Second, empowerment. We know that the EU is a place where the regulation is being made for the creative industries. We know that the rest of the world is looking at what the EU is doing. And we know that we are facing a momentum where 3 major directives were adopted in 2019. And this is now about ensuring a rapid and effective implementation of those 3 directives, the Copyright Directive, the SATCAP Directive, and the AVMS Directive. And we know that this is about providing a safe, stable, and growth sustainable environment for the CCI in the future. Last but not least, we all know that in December, the European Commission announced a very ambitious plan with 2 major regulations, the Digital Service Act and the Digital Market Act. And this will contribute to also providing a more balanced relationship between major platforms and the rest of the environment, the rest of the economy, and especially the creative sectors. And last but not least, we will also insist on the leveraging impact. And there, I would like to underline that part of the rest of the economy of the EU, especially, for example, the tourist industry, is very much relying on the dynamics of the CCI sectors, but that's also true, of course, for education and for all the dimensions of our EU. We therefore will also insist during the day on the fact that on top of those priorities, finance, empowerment, and leverage, we have an urgent need for something that could be a kind of EU-wide strategy for cultural venues post-lockdown strategy. I'm talking here right now when many EU countries have been imposing a new lockdown for the reasons we all know, and soon to be in other countries. The risk to have in 2021 and other blank years for the main festivals is significant. And as we have seen, it is very difficult for players, especially for those industries that are more and more global, to work with an absolutely lack of visibility on those strategies. And so we will urge the European Commission, as we will ask some MEPs that are very sensitive to these issues, to see how they could contribute to giving elements on a global strategy that would help both players and member states to bring a clearer view for our industries. So this is basically the three messages that we will convey to the Commissioner. And I'm now giving the floor to Marc Lermite to give you more details about this study. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Noël. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Marc Lermite, and I will be taking you through the main results of the study that we did in very complex context, as you can imagine. But want to thank the team, GESAC, their partners, and the great EY team that really led this journey and help us do three things, which I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes. One, assess the weight of the cultural and creative economy before COVID. So that was the first purpose, the first goal. Just demonstrate, as we thought we would and we could, how massive the cultural and creative economy is in Europe. So I'm going to be talking about that in a minute. Of course, as Jean-Noël said, the impact of COVID was enormous on most of the sectors. We've assessed that almost a third of the revenues of the total creative and cultural sector was impacted, and revenues lost directly because of the crisis. So I'll take you through the details of that. And third, Jean-Noël pointed to the main priorities that we identified during workshops, interviews, work with most stakeholders of the creative and cultural sectors around three pillars, and that will be my conclusion. As I said, very complex study. In other times, I would say very exciting. We would have loved to give you more positive, better results. We did that on the back of all our work and other firms' work on the creative economy, now a major player in the global economy. We stayed very close to the UNESCO definition of the CCIs, cultural and creative industries. You see here the 10 sectors. In advertising, we're only taking the creative staff and revenues. We were careful to really do the work and focus on the real sectors and not extend it too much. So we're talking about the economy of culture, the power of culture in 10 sectors in 28 countries. For those of you who know, we would do this study for 27 countries moving forward, but we wanted to make sure that the UK, a major player in the field, was included in our comparisons. We did the comparisons in between 2013 and 2019 to give the perspective of the growth and dynamics of the sector. Of course, 2020 was our benchmark and milestone year, and we hopefully will give you some hope and pointers to what may happen in the next 5 years. First, I'd like to start with reminding everyone. So everything I'm saying now, as Habib reminded us, is on the website, the rebuilding-europe.eu website, and you may receive a copy. And I know we only have about 45 minutes total, but I'll be happy with my team to take you through the details, answer any questions, if any, today and in the next few days. A massive economy, as I said earlier. We've estimated, working with dozens, hundreds of sources, that the weight of the economy of culture before COVID was about 643 billion euros in revenues, total turnover. In economic terms, that means 253 billion euros of added value. So a little bit under the 2% in GDP for the added value and over 4% in terms of turnover. What's more important is that you see growth that's actually better and faster than the overall aggregated growth in the EU, 2.6% annually versus 2% for the EU 28 between 2013 and 2019. So a quite dynamic sector across the economic sectors in Europe. And more importantly, even, and it's very underestimated in our perspective, the fact that altogether, the culture, the economy of culture and creation is about 2.4 times more important than the economy of the automotive industry and more important than the telecoms industry. Those sectors, and I'm saying that on purpose, those sectors have been very efficient, explaining who they are and making sure that their recovery plans were supported by governments, supported by the private sector, maybe more so than this sector, which is not used to working together, which is the case now with our delegation and our work. It has an effect on jobs. So before COVID, 7.6 million before COVID people were employed, mostly independent authors, artists, performers, but also technicians and staff. 90% of the overall business community is small and medium-sized enterprises. You see that on the bottom right side. Almost gender equal. I'd say there's some progress to make in the, for instance, film directors. Only 17% of them are women, but it's getting there. More importantly, plus 700,000 jobs in the past between 2013 and 2019. So this massive economy, almost 2% of the EU 28's GDP in terms of value added, has added more, almost 700,000 new jobs in the past 5 years. Had added those jobs, and you see where it's happening: visual arts, including museums, including arts, visual arts in photographs, music, the music sector, almost 100,000 more people employed. Audiovisual, of course, with the boom and the online consumption, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. What's happened in the past 5 years is also huge changes and some stress on the sector. I'll start with the positives and what I think we could rebuild Europe on. First, this whole sector has an incredible power of export, of attractiveness, of presence of the European culture, of the European purpose and member states' purpose on the global scene. And it translates into economic terms because the trade balance of cultural goods is positive by almost 9 billion euros. That's 2019 before COVID. We pointed in the study, I don't have time to go into the detail, into the very strong dynamics in Central and Eastern Europe, which is good for the overall European project. Absolutely fascinating years in innovation, digitization, not only in creation and art, but also in commercialization, in augmented reality, in ticketing, in the way the cultural experience is transmitted. And I want to stress on the top side that very often the sector is understood as very heavily backed by public finances, not so much and less in 2019 than it was 5 years before. A little under 11% of the revenues of the sectors come from national and local governments. So it's declining. And it's already, important and significant, but not as much as people think. On the downside, some of the threats we see and probably will be accelerated or aggravated by the crisis. As you can see on the bottom right, 81% of internet users in the EU, very recent numbers, use the internet for music, videos, and games. So the massive consumption and experience of culture is now online, and the growth of the online cultural content is double-digit growth and is probably going to be much bigger in the next few years. And that creates a whole new range of issues and sometimes problems for a sector. I want to insist on that is mostly made of authors, artists, composers, performers who are independent, who are individuals. There are more than 1 million rights holders in the EU. So this world of independent, not only made of major companies and global companies, but mostly independent and small businesses, has an issue with the relationship with global platforms, intermediaries. They are good for the online experience, but in terms of the compensation, the remuneration of rights, in terms of the protection of intellectual property, and in terms of their overall balance of relationship, commercial relationship, how do you solve and regulate this issue in the next few years? It's probably one of the biggest issues in the sector and in other sectors, in industry and science as well. And it creates a number of issues with finance, employment, investment, because the lack of remuneration, for instance, of rights holders creates, of course, stress on the finance of individuals and independents. What happened with COVID, probably the core of our study, but I wanted to be sure that everybody understands the power of culture after COVID. There is a very dark 2 years, maybe more, that we're experiencing now. As you can see, the darkness is illustrated by the minus 31% that the culture and creative industries, according to EY, according to our study partners, that the industry will suffer close to 200 billion in loss and drop of revenues in 2020 compared to 2019. We estimate that 2 million jobs may be at risk. I'll talk about that in a minute, because I think that's one of the major risks, the lack of attractiveness of the sectors, the lack of potential vocations and recruitment in the sector in the years to come. What's not often understood, and what I'd like to stress today, is that the sector is, unfortunately, it's a sad news, but unfortunately almost at the top of the sectors most impacted by COVID, along with air transport, but much ahead of tourism and other industrial sectors that have been probably more vocal about the impact of COVID and the long-term impact of COVID that we're experiencing. Very quickly, some of the consequences of COVID that we've uncovered during our interviews, during our research. I'll just point a few, and the rest is very much in the report. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions later on. The drop in royalties for us is a major effect and a downside effect that will last for years. The loss of the impossibility to collect royalties during events in bars, restaurants, in discos, in performing arts in 2020 is a loss of income for what's mostly a world of independents and freelancers. 2021 moving forward. January 2021 was the first month when you could collect in most countries the revenues from your work in 2020. And more than a third of those revenues have been lost completely in 2020 and will not be paid despite the support measures in some countries. We see a rising cost in production. That's very much true in the cinema, but it's also true for new exhibits. It's true also for new shows, and Jean-Noël and of course Jean-Michel will probably take you through some of the actual examples of that. I want to point something that's the third issue on the left-hand side that we've uncovered also. Of course, there is a rise of online experience, as I said, with the lockdowns, with the curfews, and it's good. And most performance artists have tried to find their online avenues. But I want to make very clear that our research shows that, for instance, in the music business, the sales of music have increased indeed by 8%. So it's good to be online, but how much revenues do you get? That's what we want to make sure you understand today. How much revenues? Plus 8% through digital channels, when the physical sales of music went down through any retailers, any record shops and other retail activities went down by 35%. So the rise of digital revenues and digital exposure does not translate in revenues for the sector, and especially for authors, composers, artists, and performance. Finally, the economic situation in Europe is probably going to make for difficult choices of leisure activities. Do I go to the movies? Do I pay for my concert tickets? Do I buy books? Do I buy what culture lives from in a European economy that will probably reach almost 16 million of unemployed in the next few months, unfortunately. So that turns into a very sharp pull of revenues. I don't have time to go into the detail of what's happening in performing arts, music, the press, the book industry, video games, etc., cinema, audiovisual, radio. You'll find that in the report, but in some sectors, the drop in revenues was so sharp that we almost have a blank year, as Jean-Noel said, and maybe another blank year in 2021 for some sectors. That translates into the inability to use cash flow that is non-existent to launch investment projects. So it's a second effect that I want to stress. We're starting to see banks put brakes and brake on the access to capital and loans. Private equity is a bit wary about the sector. We've seen that in our research. The relationship that I talked about with the net giants, platforms, intermediaries, even more unbalanced now that we have some players in huge difficulties. In the years to come, the public expenditure, the debt that's created by COVID will probably be very stressful for public expenses and public budgets. So we can anticipate, and that's one of the key items on the agenda today, that public expenditure, 11% total, but in some sectors, very critical. Classical music, for instance, museums are another example. Public expenditure will be tighter and budgets are starting to be cut in various countries, regions, and cities. I want to insist also on the local governments being players. I talked about the link with spectators, wary to come back to concerts and to venues, to cinemas, recruitments, vocations. That's an issue that maybe we'll talk about later on, up until 21 and 22, maybe later years. Finally, I want to thank all the partners, experts, stakeholders, small, medium-sized, large, public and private organizations gathered by GESAC for helping us work through a program, proposals that are organized around the three challenges that Jean-Noel talked about. I don't need to insist on the number one, which is try to find some way to refinance and to finance the rebound of culture that has so much power for the years to come, with at least the securing of 2% of the resilience, the recovery and resilience facility, the recovery plan of the EU, which is massive. And we think the sector should have its dedicated funds of at least 2%. But there are other proposals in our report that more on the private side, on the financing of culture, on the fact that the funds and cohesion policy should come also to support. Number two pillar is very important because the European Union is as much a regulator as it is a supporter of finance, and actually more a regulator, if I may say. Jean-Noel insisted on how important it is to swiftly, efficiently implement the directives on copyright, the various directives that were adopted in 2019. That is critical now to secure and empower the sector to actually work with authors and allow authors to come back to income and an economic life that is more balanced, but also strong protection of IP, investment in European content, make sure that platforms that are based outside the EU complied with EU rules. So the Digital Services Act and Digital Market Acts are very, very important in that regard. Challenge number three is not minor. It's actually very critical. We think that the power of culture is also in the creative force, in the dynamic of most of its and all of its stakeholders to play a role in the social, environmental agendas of regions, countries. There are many proposals in that respect. In the interest of time, I'll stop here, and I thank you for listening. And again, happy to help in the next few minutes or next few hours if you'd like. Thank you very much, Habib. Back to you.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Just to very quickly say, because some of you have emailed me directly, some of the attendees, the full study and the executive summaries will be up on the website directly after this press conference. Obviously, in the interest of keeping this press conference interesting so that you get all the new information fresh here, everything will be uploaded directly afterwards. And yes, please, Jean-Michel, please take it away. Jean-Michel, you need to unmute yourself.
Your microphone is down. Yeah.
One of the rare times when we can't hear Jean-Michel, unfortunately.
Yeah. There we go.
So it should be okay. Are you okay there?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, we hear you clearly, Jean-Michel.
Okay. So I was saying thank you very much, Jean-Noël and Mark, of course, for this very precise and enlightening presentation. I thank you for GESAC also to have organized this historic day. I won't be long. I just would like to share a few thoughts with you. You know, of course, I feel lucky personally and privileged today. I have my own career. I got more than a decent living for my album sales. I just finished my world tour just before the lockdown period. I've done this year some successful concerts in VR. But today, I'm worried for the new generations. How can they survive, especially within these dark times where everything is stopped? As Mark was saying, no more festivals, movies, exhibitions, live shows, and so on. And you know, during these lockdown periods, we have done two things: going out to buy some food and watching movies, reading books, and listening to music. Without culture, the lockdown periods would have been a total despair and a total desert. So if it was necessary, it has definitely proved that culture is basic necessity. It's an essential good. But just in Europe, if you don't do anything, it's about 30% of artists and technicians and creators who will have to abandon their career to change jobs. Ironically, I feel the Brexit is rather good news for European creators. When you hear that the British government said recently to artists, if you cannot survive with your jobs and with your creation, just find another job. Authors and creators will soon have to work for Uber if you don't do anything, and if we don't do anything. As president of CESAC for 6 years, I met authors, politicians, creators in Africa, in the US, in Japan, in China, and they're all looking at Europe. The US, indeed, and China are ruling the world economy, but Europe remains a model for culture all over the planet, mainly because of the way we are respecting creators. So the European Union has a responsibility. Europe has to be audacious and strong, facing especially the US and China, by reinforcing the authors' and creators' rights and the intellectual property. Authors' rights is the most timeless way to pay the creators because it does not depend on the nature of the support. Europe has to be innovative by creating, for instance, VR and AR platforms, as Mark was briefly mentioned, to develop new modes of expression and pushing young creative startups. But before anything else, to continue developing a system of rules regarding the digital world. Europe has to create a more balanced relationship with the platforms. We are partners of these platforms. We deserve a decent part of the digital cake. Things are changing, actually. I talked recently to the head of YouTube, and they are more and more ready to listen to European concerns and to collaborate with creators. And it's a first encouraging step. Deezer is trying to improve the remuneration of artists. But at the same time, Spotify, for instance, is entering in a darker area, asking artists, for instance, to accept getting less money in order to have a better position and on playlists, to ask people to make donations to artists they like. In some countries, other ones have been organized telethons, I really would like to remind to everybody that music or culture is not a disease. It is the reverse. Musicians and creators are the doctors of our souls. We are then expecting from the European Commission that they create urgently a vaccine against these abuses existing in the digital world today. I'm proud to be part of the European community in times where each country in Europe is more and more independent and isolated facing the crisis. Culture is the only way to save our unity, and culture should be a Trojan horse to reinforce the bonds of European countries. I would add that you guys from the media are, of course, on the same boat as us, and you are a key to reinforce and promote our message. So we, of course, rely on you all. Thank you. And I think that now we could maybe answer to some questions if you have any.
Yeah, Jean-Noël, if you have any final words, then please say them. If not, people who are attending the call can raise their hand to ask a question, or likewise just ask it in the question box.
I have one comment, and I want to thank so much Jean-Michel, because what can we add after what Jean-Michel just said is that as Habib told you in our introduction, we have a tough day. We have a meeting with 7 members of the Commission, and I would say that's very encouraging because it shows the interest that the commissioners are showing to the fate of the creators of Europe. Europe is about being united in diversity. And this is even the tagline of the EU. And I think what Jean-Michel stressed illustrates that stakes which are far more than just about jobs and the economy. And what we will convey, because our first meeting will be with Executive VP Valdis Dombrovskis, is that once more, member states should really leverage on the potentials of the CCIs. And this is about fundings. This is also about a fair regulatory environment, with this very encouraging sign of the DSA and DMA initiative launched by the European Commission. And because it's a regulation that's going to be in place before next summer. So I don't know if there are some questions. Habib? Your microphone is...
Sorry, yeah. No, we have around 30 or so journalists in the chat, so I don't know if anyone has any questions. If not, perhaps, Jean-Noël, you can quickly say something about our partners, because I don't think we've mentioned them so far, and they were obviously quite key in launching this study.
Yes, what I did in my introduction was to thank the broad family of partners, because this is about more than 20 various organizations that covers all the sectors, as Marc Lermine explained, that represent the variety, the diversity of the creative industries in Europe, whether it's about audiovisual sectors, press, the movie industries, music, live events, the performing arts, the visual arts, of course. And what I'd like to underline is that this kind of Creative Europe initiatives that we represent all together really reflects the strengths of this cultural economy of Europe. You have for-profit organization or non-profit organization. A society like SACEM that I run is, of course, entirely private, but it's non-profit. And therefore, by the way, like many also societies in Europe who are facing a very hard shock, because we don't have any investors, that could put cash back on our economic model. So we have started to cut jobs and diminish our investment. But that's also true, I would like to insist on that, for the public funded part of the economy. As Marc Lermine says, this is a diminishing commitment. It represents less than 10% of the overall size of this economy, which means that 90% of the investment in culture in Europe are privately funded. But there also, we have some very important worldwide leaders in terms of cultural institutions. And last but not least, we also represent the diversity of the EU, where regions, towns are very much committed in contributing to the strengths of the cultural sectors of the EU. So I would not like to name all the organizations that contributed to this study, but you have their names in the documents that have been put online. And I see that there is one question, by the way, Abby.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions. One from someone whose internet connection isn't so good, so I'll just say the question. I think Mark can answer this quite easily. It's which of the 10 sectors has experienced the sharpest fall of revenue because of COVID-19?
Well, very clearly the live event sectors and the performing arts sectors, when we see minus 90% in revenues, with the risk of a full blank year for festivals in 2021. And I think the cancellation of Glastonbury UK-based festival last week is a very worrying sign. We hope it's not going to create a domino effect, because that domino effect also affects very much authors and artists, but also producers of all types and music publishers, for example, who very much rely on the performing arts and live events for the financing of the revenues of creations in Europe.
There's another question from Marta Cervera, and I'm gonna allow her to ask it herself. So Marta, if you could please state your media outlet and then your question. You should be able to talk now on the panel. If not, then feel free to just write your question. She should be able to. While we're waiting.
There's a question from Ignacio Serrano. Sorry for mispronouncing, about the ongoing effect in 2021. Certainly, that's a huge development, a sad development of the ongoing crisis. I want to stress what Jean-Noël said. It's a crisis for the whole sector, but it's very much a crisis for the live activities and venues. The live activities in total represent 25% of the sector. So we wouldn't be talking about culture if we weren't talking about first the live emerging artists. You know, it's of course a social activity and leisure, but it's also a way to promote. And the fact that it will be going on for 2021 is another effect. For instance, another number, 75% of the revenues from movie theaters were lost across Europe in 2020. And we see that developing, and it's putting a huge stress, because the revenues from the movie theaters still represent 40 to 50% of the revenues of the movie industry in general. So we have to follow those developments. And as Jean-Noël said, before rebuilding Europe, which is very much the title of the study that we are presenting today, and we think culture can rebuild Europe, we need to unlock Europe and definitely follow that throughout 2021.
Another question that came in, maybe this is more for Jean-Noël, which is how will we proceed after this? You mentioned that collaboration in the cultural sector isn't so great. So what's the next steps?
No, I'd like to underline, on the contrary, that 2015 was a momentum where cultural forces all over Europe, with all their differences that I mentioned, have united in trying a new strategy, which we can summarize in 3 letters: ERP, explain, rally, propose. Explain is exactly what we do today, with a study that brings a global vision of how comprehensive we are. Rally, we are together. There may be a lot of differences, including conflicting interest, but nevertheless, on stage, we are united. And last but not least, propose. This is exactly what we will do today. We have clear propositions for now and for later on. And as we will say to the Commissioner, and especially to Executive VP Valdis Dombrovskis in a few minutes, we need you now, because the EU Commission will look after what member states are doing with this relief and recovery and resilience facility, to make sure that they dedicate, let's say, 2%, which is on an average 13 to 15 billion euros to CCI. To Commissioner Breton, we will tell him, you are our hope because you are the regulator of the creative sectors in Europe. And then we have an agenda. There are new threats for creators. The model of proportional remuneration for creators is really one of the fundamentals of the European model. This is about authors' rights, as mentioned by Jean-Michel. We know that copyright and authors' rights have the same goal, which is to protect intellectual property, to protect creation, but at the core of it, we have authors, creators. So this is part of the agenda. And to answer properly to this very accurate question, I believe that in times of crisis, Europeans know how to unite. This is why we created the European community in 1957. Today, what we are facing for the fate and future of Europe is something that resembles the 1957 rendezvous. And we really much believe that with our agenda of proposition, with what the European Union regulators have been doing with the 3 directives of 2019, which need to be fully and rapidly implemented. With Article 17, for example, to have a fair, balanced play rights between big platforms and the creative forces of Europe. We have an agenda here that would help to leverage the potential of the system for Europe. Thank you.
I think we have time for just one more question, which was Marta's question, which is, what can we do to change the impossibility of performing live? What can be done to change that?
Sorry, can you just repeat a bit?
Yeah, what can be done to change the impossibility of performing live?
Oh, I would say here, as we mentioned, we need a midterm strategy. Of course, we are not talking about next days or next weeks. In some countries, the lockdown is back. In other countries, it may be coming soon. And of course, there is a vaccine strategy that will take months to be fully implemented. But we are facing today with a chaotic situation where from one country to another, the strategies have not simply been benchmarked when it is about live events, concert, festival. And we see inconsistencies where some very important places where people are being gathered stayed open, while movie theaters or theaters are still being closed, when many studies have shown that from a purely health point of view, they could be open. By the way, Luxembourg has decided to reopen many of the cultural venues with a lot, of course, of healthcare measures. And the ministers of health in Luxembourg stated that this was important, including for the social health of the population, to be able to be back to those cultural events and cultural venues. So in a nutshell, what we are really asking there is that, as it has been the case since this crisis started, the EU has been bold, embarking in new initiatives, things that we thought before COVID would not be feasible. It should be the same for this cultural venues unlock strategy that we think should be also addressed at EU level, like many other topics have been addressed with great success at EU level.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean-Noël, and thank you to all of our speakers, Jean-Michel and Marc. I think this was very interesting for everyone who took the time to come this morning, and have a good day of meetings ahead of you, because I know I think you're all involved in at least a few of these meetings. So thank you very much to everyone who attended. Like we said, you can download the study and everything else from the Rebuilding Europe website, and send any of your questions to myself or Marc and his team, and we'll get those answered for you. Thank you very much.